Probably the most striking feature inside our church is the icon in the dome of our church, the Pantocrator image of Jesus. It has been said to be either the biggest or one of the biggest individual icons in North America. This image of Jesus is fairly common in the church in Europe and here in the States. The Pantocrator image represents Jesus as King of the universe. He's represented holding the book of life, which he has the power to open and close. His hand is raised in a gesture of blessing. The Greek letters on either side of the icon stand for Jesus Christ. And then the Greek letters in his nimbus, in the halo around his head, stand for the name that God gave to Moses, I am who am. So this icon is identifying Jesus as both Jesus Christ, the man, and God. You see the three rays in the nimbus behind his head, also identifying him as a member of the Holy Trinity. When you look at the icon of Jesus and then the apostles around him, you'll notice that clothes seem almost to be satiny. They seem to shimmer or radiate light. And even his face, there are places where there's light emanating from his face, highlights on his face that, maybe wouldn't be there in real life. Icons are meant to be glorified images of the people that they portray. And so because Jesus is God, because the apostles are saints and they're glorified in heaven, they do radiate light. And in fact, when iconographers write icons, they're written instead of painted as a prayer. And so there's a very prayerful process that goes into them. And they actually paint from the darker tones into the lighter tones, trying to draw from the image that light of God and try to draw people into the light of God and the light of Christ. The colors are also symbolic. In particular, you can notice in the dome icon that we start on the lower edge in earth tones and then process toward more heavenly blues and then ultimately into the deep blue around Jesus. That deep blue has been symbolic of the unknowability of God the Father. Also, the 8-pointed stars around Jesus are another ancient symbol of God. And so he's surrounded by 8-pointed stars. We've got 12 apostles around them, but you might notice as you process through the church and under the dome that we have St. Peter and St. Paul both represented. We don't have St. Matthias, the apostle that was chosen after Judas betrayed Christ. There's also symbolism in the positioning of St. Peter and Paul. So as we enter the church and approach the altar, the saint that is front and center is St. Peter, who is the first of the apostles to identify Jesus as the Messiah. As we exit the church then, opposite from St. Peter is St. Paul. He's the image that's front and center as we are sent forth on our mission of making disciples, and he was the great evangelist apostle that spread the gospel so far in the known world. Another thing you'll notice when you look at St. Paul is while the other apostles are holding scrolls representing their prophetic roles and sharing the word of God, he is actually carrying a book, and that represents his substantial contribution to the New Testament. Behind our altar and tabernacle, we have an image called Our Lady of the Sign. It's an image of our Blessed Mother, and it identifies her as the Theotokos, the God-bearer. Again, this was important because in the early church there was discussion about whether you could actually call Mary the Mother of God, the God-bearer. And so the Greek letters on either side of Mary identify her as the Theotokos, the God-bearer. This image is a beautiful image. Her hands are spread in prayer in the orans position that you see the priests use. So she's praying for her people, but she's also inviting us into relationship to Jesus who's within her. Sometimes when people look at this image, they see the image of Jesus and they're not quite sure what to make of it. He doesn't look like a typical baby that you would see in the womb of his mother or even in the arms of his mother. He's got a really high forehead and a lot of hair and kind of an older, wiser look on his face than you would expect in a child. There's symbolic reasons for that. How do you represent a baby who is also the Lord of the universe, who is the Word of God through which everything was created, who was there at the beginning, who knows the end? And so it calls to mind for me St. Augustine's words referring to Jesus as ever ancient and ever new. And again, this is a glorified image of Mary and the baby Jesus, and so it's not meant to be an image of this world. Sometimes people also notice that Mary looks maybe a little older, a little sterner than we're used to seeing her in the Western Church. Typically in the Western Church, we represent Mary as a young, virginal, beautiful girl. And in the Eastern Church, it is more common to represent her as maybe a little older and definitely a Jewish mother. Roughly football-shaped shape around Mary is called a mandorla. And it represents the intersection of two circles. So if you kind of visualize a big circle going up this way, and then a big circle going that way, the intersection of them makes this football shape. And the reason that's important is because it's calling to mind that there are two worlds meeting. The heavenly and the earthly are meeting in this moment with Mary and Jesus conceived in her womb. And you'll see that throughout the artwork in the church and some of the stained glass in other places, this mandorla shape calling to mind the meeting of heaven and earth. On either side of Mary, you see two angels. One is a seraphim, the redder one, which burns a little hotter because the seraphim are closer to God, and the other is a cherub, is a little bluer in tone because they're the next choir out from God. Then as we move to either side of Mary, we have, again, a reference to the Eastern and Western churches. So when you're facing Mary on the left, you see the doctors of the Eastern Church. We have 6 saints represented here. St. Michael the Archangel is actually at the top. St. Michael not only is our patron saint, but a very important saint in the Eastern Church. So he's represented on the Eastern side. And then 5 doctors of the Eastern Church. The one of particular note that I'd like to point out is on the lower left, St. John of San Francisco. The Russian iconographers who wrote these icons were told that they could put one saint of their choice in among the other Catholic saints. And they chose St. John of San Francisco, who is an Eastern Orthodox saint, not a Catholic saint. He's an incorruptible saint in San Francisco. And he stands out among all the other saints for his very Eastern Orthodox headdress and his big full beard. To the right of Mary, then, we have the doctors of the Western Church. At the top, we have St. Gabriel the Archangel, and then 5 doctors of the Roman Catholic Church. In the center, I want to point out that we have St. Catherine of Siena. And the reason I wanted to note her is that several years ago, a group from our church took a pilgrimage to Rome, and our associate pastor at that time brought back a relic of St. Catherine to be put in our altar. For a long time, this altar did not have a relic, and we used to joke that it's because our patron saint is an archangel and doesn't leave behind many relics, but now we have a relic of St. Catherine to go along with the icon behind the altar.